On the morning of December 30th, 2016, a local hunter was walking his dog along the road in Gilwe, in Belgium's West Flanders province. During the walk, his dog came across a burnt corpse overgrown with blackberry bushes, lying in a ditch off the road. The hunter dismissed it as an animal carcass and went home. However, he spent the entire night second-guessing whether it was really an animal or a human body, and he decided to call the police first thing on the morning of December 31st. When the police arrived, they saw rats eating away at the carcass, which they had to shoo away. The body was immediately identified as human, though it was nearly unrecognizable. The torso was severely burnt, and the face was unrecognizable, while the hands and feet were mostly intact. The feet, fortunately, were preserved, and the victim had distinctive nail polish with a design on her toenails. The police believed a beautician might remember applying such a unique design and recall the client. The police concluded on the spot that it was likely a murder due to the burns and the fact that she was barely wearing any clothing. They ruled out the possibility of self-immolation, as there was no lighter or container of white spirit that she could have used to set herself on fire. They also confirmed the victim was a woman, and based on the state of decomposition, she had been dead for a while. From the location, the police speculated that the killer must have been a local familiar with the area, as the body was found in a secluded spot. Lastly, since no missing person reports had been filed, they had no guesses about the victim's identity. This is the tragic story of Nguyen, a Vietnamese woman who traveled all the way to Belgium in hopes of meeting her lover, only to meet her end at his hands. Welcome back to Crime Rhapsody, where we conduct in-depth research to bring you news of crimes from all around the world. Now, let's get into the details. Nguyen was born into a modest family with 6 children, and of all her siblings, she was the most academically gifted. Her parents focused most of their resources on her, investing heavily in her education. Eventually, they accumulated enough money for her to travel abroad to Nagoya, Japan, for further studies. While in Japan, Nguyen studied management and accounting, then interior design, and finally bioengineering. However, managing her studies was difficult due to the high cost of living in Japan compared to back home in Vietnam. Nguyen had to take several jobs, such as working as a housekeeper at a hotel, as a waitress at a restaurant, and at a supermarket. She also routinely sent money back to her parents in Vietnam. It was during this time that she met John, and the two hit it off immediately, continuing to stay in touch after he left Japan for Belgium. Her parents, however, did not approve of the relationship and wanted her to find a boyfriend closer to home. John was born in 1989 in Zonnebeke and studied to become an electrician but didn't finish his studies. Despite this, he secured a well-paying job, one that required frequent travel to places like Mexico, Italy, Bulgaria, and eventually Japan. It was during one of these trips in May 2016 that he met Nguyen through a dating site. Initially, their conversations were normal and centered around their interests, but they soon turned sexual. In fact, John frequently asked if they could have sex in his text messages. They eventually met at a hotel for a date and later had consensual sex. After John returned to Belgium, he continued to keep in touch with Nguyen through chat messages. However, John had lied about his name and address, so Nguyen wouldn't be able to look him up and discover pictures of his girlfriend and child on his Facebook. John knew his deception wouldn't last forever, and that Nguyen would eventually find out about his real life, which would ruin his marriage. In a desperate attempt to preserve his reputation and family, John devised a plan to lure Nguyen to Belgium and kill her. John began relentlessly pressuring Nguyen to take a break from her studies and visit him in Belgium, sending 139 text messages urging her to make the trip. Little did she know, his true intention was to cover up the affair by killing her. Every time Nguyen hesitated or expressed reluctance, John would bring up the idea of having children with her, something she deeply wanted. John didn't want to spend his own money on the plan, so he forced Nguyen to pay for everything, She took out several loans just to fund her trip to Belgium. First, she flew to Helsinki, where she got a connecting flight to Amsterdam. Finally, she paid for a train ticket to Courtrai, Belgium, where she had no accommodations waiting for her. After the train arrived, Nguyen expected John to pick her up. Instead, despite being free, John delayed staying home. By the time he finally arrived, Nguyen was unhappy about being made to wait in a foreign country where she didn't know anyone. This led to an argument. John explained that she couldn't stay with him or take any pictures or videos of her trip because of his girlfriend and son. Feeling betrayed, Nguyen slapped John and threatened to expose the affair. In response, John did what he had already been planning, but earlier than intended. He began beating her, focusing on her face, resulting in multiple fractures to her facial bones. Eventually, Nguyen was beaten unconscious. John then drove to a secluded area in Belgium municipality. Once there, he covered her mouth and nose with his hand for about 43 seconds until she suffocated. By that time, Nguyen had only been in Belgium for an hour. John drove back home with Nguyen's body still in the car, hoping his girlfriend wouldn't notice. Fortunately for him, she didn't, as she was busy watching TV and the blinds were closed. John retrieved a plastic barrel, white spirit, and some matches from the shed, loaded them into the car, and drove to Gilwe. There, he placed Nguyen's body in the barrel, covered it with plastic, poured white spirit over it, and used lit newspapers to ignite the fire. He quickly left the scene and drove to a nearby canal, where he threw Nguyen's handbags and backpack into the water. These items were never recovered. By 9 p.m., John had returned home, having been out for 3 hours. He cleaned the blood from his car, washed his clothes, and shredded Nguyen's ID before dumping it in a trash bin. He kept her wallet, which he later disposed of during his shift at work the next day. The police recovered the body and took it to the morgue. The autopsy began on January 2nd, 2017, and the medical examiner noted several fractures on the woman's face, including one on the skull and another near the eye socket. Her height was estimated at 1.44 meters, and she appeared to be between 18 and 25 years old. She also had a pronounced overbite. The victim wasn't carrying any identification, handbag, or purse, only a necklace. The only other item found was a burnt piece of black plastic, likely the remains of the container in which her body was placed before being set on fire. Based on the shape of her skull, the coroner determined that the Jane Doe was of Asian descent. Initially, the police suspected that the victim could have been Narumi Kurosaki, a Japanese student who went missing from France on December 5, 2016. They speculated that her killer may have transported her body across the border into Belgium to make it harder to trace. However, Narumi was ruled out quickly. As for the burnt torso, a piece of fabric recovered from the charred remains revealed a label from a t-shirt with the brand Masakinuo, a company that operates exclusively in Asia. Additionally, the victim wore a unique watch manufactured in Japan, with only 1,300 units ever produced, all sold in Japan. These clues indicated that the victim wasn't a local of Asian descent, but more likely an Asian tourist, student, or recent immigrant. With this in mind, the police reached out to all the Asian embassies in Belgium, but none had reported any of their nationals missing. They also questioned employees at local immigration offices and refugee centers, but none could provide useful information. This led the police to believe that the woman either had not been reported missing or had limited contact with her family. The investigation continued with door-to-door inquiries in Gilwe, a small rural community, but none of the locals recognized or had seen any Asian women in the area. Next, the police visited nearby beauty and nail salons, showing staff the deceased's unique nail polish, but no one recognized or remembered applying it. The nearby large-scale mushroom farms, which employed many Asian immigrants, were also visited. However, all the workers were accounted for, leaving this as another dead end. They then questioned local sex workers, as many Asian immigrants were involved in the trade, but again, no useful leads emerged. Asian-themed restaurants, such as Thai and Chinese establishments, were also visited, but none reported any missing employees. Lastly, the police ran her DNA through databases from neighboring countries, since Belgium lacked its own DNA database, but this too yielded no results. While the police were chasing these leads in vain, forensic examiners were still carefully examining the charred remains. Under the body, they found bundles of burnt newspapers soaked in white spirit alcohol. Some of the newspapers had survived and were still legible. These provided a major breakthrough. The headline identified the newspaper as a Dutch publication, Metro, dated November 21st, 2016. This led the police to believe that their Jane Doe had likely met her end around November 21st, or shortly thereafter. This theory was further supported when police analyzed the larvae and maggots found on the body, which corroborated that the time of death was approximately November 20th or 21. Despite this breakthrough, it did little to help identify the victim. By February 7th, 2017, the police had crafted a facial reconstruction of the victim. They issued public notices across Belgium, asking if anyone recognized her face, belongings, or nail polish, or if anyone had seen anything unusual or suspicious between November 20th and 21st, 2016. This effort seemed to pay off when a local from Gilwe came forward, claiming to have seen a man jogging with his Asian girlfriend sometime earlier. The man mentioned by the witness was a local familiar with the area. His Thai girlfriend and her daughter had moved to Belgium with him, but neither had been seen in a while. After this, a judge granted the police a warrant, allowing them to break into the man's home. They ransacked the place and checked the drains of his sink for any traces of blood or DNA. Despite their best efforts, there was no sign of criminal activity, indicating that the murder had occurred elsewhere. For now, the Belgian police could only inform their Thai counterparts and wait. It didn't take long for them to hear back. The Thai police found the man, his girlfriend, and her daughter all alive and well, enjoying a fun and relaxing vacation. They also briefly investigated another man who was reported to have a Nepalese girlfriend who hadn't been seen in a while, but she was ruled out as the deceased. With the first suspect cleared, the police lost their only lead and were back to square one. They reissued the notices on May 2nd, 2018, but once again, nobody came forward. Ultimately, the murder case grew cold. On August 13th, 2018, the Vietnamese embassy contacted the police in Belgium's capital, Brussels. They reached out after receiving a letter from a man in Vietnam who stated that he hadn't been in contact with his daughter, 28-year-old Nguyen, since November 21st, 2016. After her disappearance, the Vietnamese police did not conduct a thorough investigation into her case. Upon learning that she might be with a Belgian man, they concluded that she had willingly left the country without verifying this information and promptly ended their investigation. Nguyen's father was left to search for his missing daughter on his own, even posting ads and notices on Facebook, including within the Vietnamese communities in Japan and Belgium, but he went 2 years without any leads. Exhausting every avenue in Vietnam, he remembered that she had met a Belgian man while studying in Japan and that she had been regularly speaking with a Belgian man online. Out of desperation for information, he contacted the Vietnamese embassy in Brussels, hoping they could compel the local police to check if she was in the country. The embassy learned about the body found in Gilwe and subsequently informed the Vietnamese police. They collected DNA samples from Nguyen's family and provided the police with a mobile phone that Nguyen had returned to Vietnam. The phone and samples were sealed in a diplomatic suitcase and flown from Vietnam to Belgium. Upon arrival, the DNA samples from Nguyen's family matched those of the Gilwe Jane Doe. Investigators examined the contents of the phone and discovered conversations she had with her parents, including pictures of her Belgian boyfriend. They also retrieved text messages from a man in Belgium pressuring her, to fly to the country in the weeks leading up to Nguyen's murder. The pressure extended beyond Nguyen, as her father received a text message from a Belgian number urging him to allow his daughter to come to Belgium, claiming the tickets were already paid for and promising to take good care of her. Among the phone's contents were pictures of the man's passport and identity card. However, there was an inconsistency. The name was supposedly John Rosier's, but the identity card spelled it with 2 S's instead of 1. Additionally, the passport numbers turned out to be fake. The only thing that matched was the photo. Nguyen had previously given a friend some contact details, including a Belgian phone number. When the police called this number, they discovered it wasn't personal. Instead, it belonged to a company in Belgium with 444 employees. This demonstrated how far John had gone to cover his tracks. The police obtained a list of all employees and systematically went through each name. Eventually, they identified 29-year-old John Van Doelig, who looked exactly like the man in Nguyen's phone and the passport photo. John had a girlfriend he met in 2009 and moved in with her in 2013. Their infant son was born on October 27, 2016. Despite being described by his girlfriend as a nice and kind man, John had exhibited verbally aggressive behavior at times. There was one incident where he slapped her, but he ceased after she threatened to leave if he did it again. John would often use his phone almost every time his girlfriend saw him, leading her to assume he was communicating with clients. Described as reserved and modest, she never suspected any infidelity during his trips abroad. Unbeknownst to her, John had traveled to Japan in May 2016 and met Nguyen through a dating site. On November 8, 2018, the police decided it was time to arrest John. Knowing he left for work early in the morning, they positioned themselves strategically outside his home, far enough away to avoid alarming his family. They set up a fake DUI checkpoint, stopping John as he drove away. After asking him to step out of his vehicle, they led him into the back of a police van, claiming that their equipment and breathalyzer tests were located inside. Once the doors shut, officers handcuffed him and placed him under arrest for the premeditated murder of Nguyen T. Xuan. This arrest came just days before his scheduled wedding. Initially, John denied any involvement, admitting only to knowing Nguyen. However, after 2.5 hours of intense interrogation, he confessed, revealing that Nguyen's other cell phone and tablet were buried beneath his bathtub. Retrieving them required high-grade tools to cut into his bathroom. The police quickly found both devices hidden in a corner. Across these 2 devices, they uncovered over 9,000 sexually charged messages exchanged between Nguyen and John, all occurring while his son was being born. John's trial began on January 8, 2020. On the first day, prosecutors sought to dismiss any potential insanity defense, submitting psychiatric reports indicating that John was aware of his actions and not a psychopath. During the trial, John claimed the murder was an accident, attempting to shift blame onto his girlfriend. He stated that he sought to cheat on her due to dissatisfaction with her sexual performance, suggesting that if she had fulfilled his needs, he wouldn't have cheated with Nguyen. He argued that if he hadn't met Nguyen, he wouldn't have killed her, placing some of the blame on his girlfriend. The central issue for the jury to deliberate was whether John acted with premeditation. On January 14th, the jury returned a guilty verdict, but concluded that the murder was not premeditated. They acknowledged that John had lured Nguyen to Belgium, but considered the act of murder itself too haphazard and impulsive to have been planned. On January 15, 2020, John Van Doelig was sentenced to 27 years in prison, 1 year less than the prosecution had sought. He will be eligible for parole as early as November 2027. While many in Belgium felt satisfied with the sentence, Nguyen's family in Vietnam was not. They learned through John's conviction that capital punishment was not universally applied. Expecting the death penalty, as was common in Vietnam, they were shocked to discover the difference in legal systems. After the trial, John's ex-girlfriend was asked about Nguyen and expressed no animosity toward her, stating that Nguyen was an innocent victim, unaware of her existence, and that it would be pointless to hate her for dating her partner. Today, Nguyen rests in a cemetery not far from where her body was discovered.